Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Kat Heagberg. So Kat is the editor of Yoga International. She is experienced yoga teacher, teaching since 2005, teaching a lot of online yoga. So we'll talk about that. And joining us from Pennsylvania, I believe today. Kat, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And how did you get interested in working with the body? What was your into this?
Well, I started dancing when I was 3 years old. My mom put me in ballet classes, and I really, I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it because it was a social thing. I could hang out with other kids. You got a piece of candy, maybe a sticker at the end. But it wasn't until I was about 10 that I started really getting into dance. And I had this idea that I was going to be a professional ballet dancer. I was going to be a rockette, or I was going to be on Broadway. So I went to college and studied classical ballet for about 2 years in college, and realized that I did not have what it takes, nor did I really want to be a professional ballet dancer. But it was at that time that I was doing a lot of Pilates, just for general cross training. If you're a dancer, they, at least back in the early 2000s, late 90s, they told you to do a lot of Pilates. And eventually I started teaching Pilates, and people would come to my class and say, what's the difference between Pilates and yoga? And I would have to say, I have no idea. I don't teach yoga. I've taken maybe one yoga class before, and it was nice, but I don't really know anything about it. But I was curious and started, going to yoga classes, and found that it was a really nice change of pace. I really enjoyed not feeling like I was constantly having to perform all the time. It felt like there was a little bit more room for exploration. And, coming from that dance background and being fairly flexible, it was something that I felt like I was good at right away. And when you feel like you're good at something, you tend to want to do it more and more and more because you're reinforced by those around you. So I started exploring yoga then, and pretty soon my daily dance classes morphed into daily yoga classes. Started teaching that, and started teaching other forms of movement around the same time, but gradually that kind of fell by the wayside for a while. And I was, just like yoga girl into yoga. And now I'm kind of at the space where I'm back to exploring other forms of movement, because the yoga, while wonderful, is not, it's not enough to do everything that I feel like I need to be a complete moving person in this life.
What are you exploring at the moment, Kat? I know the yoga world generally is kind of opening up at the moment. What are you looking at? Feldenkrais or dance again, or like what's intriguing you now?
Well, I'm definitely doing a lot more with dance, which is fun because I have no illusions now that, I'm going to be a professional dancer. I want to make money, or I want to gain fame from doing this like I did when I was younger. It's just really more about having fun. I did an adult hip hop class recently, which was just a blast.
Cool.
And tap dancing I've always loved. Right now I just tap dance on a little piece of wood in my little yoga studio in my house, but I love that. And as far as interacting with other people, I've been doing a little bit more with bar and a lot of running. Running is it's one of those things that I never thought I would like or enjoy in any way, shape, or form at all. In high school, when we had to run the mile, I was like, that's the day that I would get sick and stay home. But there's something very meditative about it that I found to enjoy.
We had Catherine Brunei-Young on the show talking about going into strength training from yoga. And it's interesting, there's this kind of weird movement now back into some sort of, strength training and running and, kind of almost more like traditional kind of Western fitness practices. I'm also imagining you doing hip hop dance. You are, for the listeners can't see, but you are very white and in fact have white hair if the pictures are still there. So I'm imagining you getting ghetto on it.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely super, super white girl hip hop dancer. Not by any means am I good at it, but I think that that's part of what makes it so fun is there's not necessarily a pressure to be good at it.
And I think there's a real joy in just having dancing for fun, isn't there? Like after doing kind of form-based practice like yoga or martial arts for a while, there's something quite freeing about just jumping around and being silly and not having to get it right.
Absolutely. And, kind of an interesting part of it too is one of the things that I enjoyed so much about yoga when I first started practicing was the lack of the performance aspect. But then the longer I practiced, the more I realized I kind of missed that.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you're in the yoga world to admit I want to perform because it's so antithetical to what yoga, at least is air quotes, supposed to be about. So that performance aspect is definitely something that I didn't realize that I had missed so much until I started just moving with other people and being in an environment where you're kind of encouraged to, for lack of a better word, show off a little bit.
Yeah. And I wonder if it doesn't come out sideways in yoga because it's like, I mean, part of us wants to go in and part of us wants to go out. Part of us is private, part of us is social. We're all human beings. We have both sides. And I wonder if in a culture of yoga where it's like you always have to be in, it doesn't come out in this weird like performance way where people are performing in a yoga class without admitting they are. And there's a sort of dishonest performance happening rather than just an honest like, yeah, I'm showing off right now. Look at me. It's like it comes out sideways. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. That's certainly been the experience that I've had where you do sometimes want to be like, hey, I just did this really cool thing. Did anybody see that? Did anybody look? And then there's like that yoga guilt. Like, I'm not supposed to be feeling this way.
In embodied yoga principles, we have a public pose and a private pose. We have one where you're really like big and being seen and one where you're really in. And we get people to play with that balance. And, I always quite laugh every time I see a sort of yoga Instagram picture of someone being really internally focused. I'm like, hang on a minute. You just deliberately shared this with thousands of people. So that's a lie. We're not inwardly focused, and that's okay, but be honest about that. Be honest that this is an externally focused thing. And in embodiment, we've had teachers on that talk about the performance body. It's a thing that actors have, dancers have, and that's okay, but just be straightforward about that. I mean, this brings us really into some of the main topic really for today is that, so you're the editor of one of the largest yoga magazines. Is that fair to say? Readership of?
I would say so. Yeah.
How many people are reading that?
We're pretty much all online now. We do have a print edition that comes out yearly that's kind of a best of compilation, but Yoga International is membership based, and although we have plenty of readers for articles who aren't members, but we have over 300,000 members in our community right now.
Wow.
So that's pretty big. Yeah.
And I was actually on your podcast. So I want to big up your podcast while I was there, and I listened to your podcast, and I hope you didn't get too many complaints. So I think I was in Russia when I was doing it, and I remember it was you and a light-hearted gentleman, I think, that interviewed me. And so you actually work on the podcast there as well, right?
I do. Yeah. Kyle and I have the Yoga Talks podcast, which is, it started out being a little bit more information based where we would pick a topic and we would discuss it and do a lot of research. And just because there is, like so much going on and we were working with all of these great teachers and writers, we kind of transitioned to a format that was a little bit more interview based and Q&A based. And we've been doing that for the past couple of years, which is it's really fun.
Who was your favorite other than me?
Other than you. We recorded recently with Diane Bondi. We record with her a lot. She's a good friend of ours and comes to film with us at Yoga International, is one of our featured teachers often, or she's one of our featured teachers and she works with us often. And she's always just a blast to talk to. We also recorded with Amber Carnes from Body Positive Yoga recently.
Yes,
and when I did that interview, I always get a little bit nervous. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm certainly like more comfortable writing than I am talking most of the time.
Yeah.
And when I'm interviewing people, I always worry, am I going to talk too much? Am I going to have the right questions? Am I going to run out of things to say? And with Amber, she's just so good and has so much knowledge that it felt like just having a conversation. Like I just wanted to sit there and listen to her and she could keep the whole thing going on her own. It was amazing.
That's nice. Yeah, I like those kind of guests where I'm just kind of chatting and it's flowing. And so you're writing articles as well, right? You're editing. So you're making decisions about kind of like what goes in and what doesn't. Is that correct? And also doing
Yeah,
podcasts.
yeah.
The variety of things you're doing at Yoga International.
Yeah. In the beginning, I think I was writing a lot more than I am now. Again, it's just like the time factor. You know, in the beginning, I had a little bit more time to write more articles, and we didn't have quite as many people that we were working with. So almost like I had to, write a lot of the articles. But I try to take one day a week where I work from home and I just write and I just get an article ready to go and ready to be looked at by some of the other editors on our staff. But a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis, as far as the editorial portion goes, is working with writers, going back and forth, helping to shape a piece. And I feel really fortunate, I guess, because I learned so much doing that. I learned so much about yoga in general from the experts and the writers that we're working with, but then also in the fact-checking process and the research process and the, making sure that everything we put out there is accurate and verifiable. And that's just like, I feel like it can be tedious at times just looking up all of these studies and everything, but the information that I get that I have to, then later share with my yoga students or in other places is really invaluable.
You're not spreading any yoga myths. We had Ariana Rabinovich on talking about yoga myths. You haven't had her on, really get her on your show too. She's really good at sort of debunking some of the kind of, twists, detoxify your liver or some of the kind of nonsense that's out there, which is just not verified. So it's quite
agreed.
Yeah. I mean, you're in quite a position really. And because yoga is a big business. I saw some figures on this the other day that yoga in the United States is worth many millions of pounds as an industry, essentially, though might be an uncomfortable word for some. And to get into major publications or, for me to get on your podcast was cool. It was like, okay, great. This is going to be good for my business, And
thanks. Yeah.
But you're in a certain position of authority there, right? Like if you're like, how do you decide what goes in and what doesn't? Is it just like what the readers want? How are you filtering stuff? Like there's not just you, obviously there's other yoga journal and other yoga things that are out there. Like I kind of wonder like how they decide what goes in and what doesn't. Is it just that people know someone? Like how does that decision-making process work?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. A lot of times, if I happen to meet someone in a context outside of Yoga International, like if I'm at a yoga workshop or if I'm at a training or doing some sort of continuing education and someone just seems to really have a lot to offer, or they seem to be someone that would be a good fit, or they have something unique to share, then I might just approach that person and say, hey, I work for Yoga International and I think that you'd have a lot to offer our audience. Are you interested in writing for us? Are you interested in filming some classes with us? So sometimes it just happens really organically like that. Other times people will reach out to us and submit articles or say, hey, I'd like to work with you, Yoga International. And then we look and we see, do we have the time and the space, of course, to make this happen? And what has this person done? What is this person teaching? Do we think that they would be a good fit? We try not to just feature people who are famous or yoga celebrities. And that's something that's really important to me because I really think that we all learn more and are able to grow more when we have a diversity of voices, teachers who are, bigger names and teachers who are not so big names. And what's really more important to me than someone's celebrity status is that they have something that can serve our readers. And really, I was talking to my editorial staff about this the other day when we were thinking of submissions and we were thinking of, well, what articles should we consider? What articles should we not? And the question came up, like, how do you really know whether to say yes to a pitch?
Yep.
And what we came up with was, well, the first question that you ask is, how is this going to serve our readers?
Yep.
A lot of our readers, a lot of our members are yoga teachers, yoga practitioners. Is this new information? Is this helpful information? Is it going to make them think? Is it going to inspire them? Is it going to teach them something? And that's really, I guess I would say that's the most important thing, is how does it serve our membership?
Yeah, I have the same with the podcast. I'm always like, okay, well, knowing my audience as well as I can, is someone on actually going to be useful for my audience? Are they going to say something new? Are they going to have a new angle on something? Is it going to be in some way there's some depth there? And then, often I am influenced by, am I personally wanted to talk to this person? Like, I remember getting on pretty well with you and thinking, okay, this is probably going to be pleasant. There's a personal bias in there too. If I'm honest, sometimes it's like, hey, I really want to learn from this person. Yeah, and the yoga celebrity thing is, it's been much maligned, much criticized. Obviously, celebrities are part of just general culture now. And it's sometimes from other arts, it can seem an odd idea. Like there's very few celebrity Aikido teachers, for example. And it also seems like it's a thing now that like almost every teacher's aspiring to be this, or not almost every, but many yoga teachers. So for example, there's a book called like How to Be a Yoga Rock Star. And I can't imagine that book for meditation teachers, for example, or rock star masseuse or a rock star karate teacher. It seems like it's become a thing. The pursuit of celebrity has become very normal amongst yoga teachers now.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, and a lot of it. So it reminds me of that that performance aspect as well. Just the idea that it seems in some ways so antithetical to the yoga, but then it's so prominent in the yoga culture is this wanting it and then feeling bad that you want it. Maybe it goes back to all of that. We did a podcast on yoga guilt once, and that was something that came up a lot.
Yeah.
I wonder if a lot of it has to do too with, at least partially, how difficult it is to make a living as a yoga teacher and the money that's involved once you reach that celebrity status, when you have people coming to your workshops, when you have people purchasing your products, when you have, online platforms that want to feature your classes. For a few years, I was a full-time yoga teacher in Portland, Oregon, and it was pretty much impossible, at least for me, just to teach yoga classes full-time. I ended up doing a little bit with retreats and doing some teacher training things, and a lot of privates, which certainly helped quite a bit. But eventually I also got a job working in a clothing store selling yoga pants, because being a yoga teacher is just not the most sustainable career if you don't have that celebrity boost.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to try and prize apart the motives, isn't it? Like, is it that I just want to get my stuff out there and help people? Because I genuinely believe what I do is helpful. I think most yoga teachers believe that, and rightly so. Is it that it's my ego? I notice my ego get involved in this. As I call myself a sort of mid-sized teacher. There's actually less of us. There's a huge number of sort of unknown teachers. And there's a few very well-known teachers of, say, same in life coaching, there's a Tony Robbins on the top end. And there's a kind of middle ground of this not very big of mid-sized teachers. So I definitely noticed this in my own career, the sort of ego kind of saying, I want to be famous. I want that prestige. I want to be known. And then there's just the financial necessity. Like all but 2 Aikido teachers in the UK are not professional. So they don't have to worry for their income and paying the bills about being known. That's not a professional consideration for them. And I think the other thing that's different with yoga than, say, Aikido or other things is it's not a progression that just happens over time. Like in Aikido, if you're around for 40 years, very likely you'll be a prestigious teacher after 40 years. Whereas in yoga, you could just be young and have a great Instagram and look good in a bikini doing yoga on the beach in Bali. And all of a sudden you've got 100,000 Instagram followers. Like I have a student that has 55,000 Instagram followers, and she's been practicing, I think, 5 years. And there's a way in which you can be thrust into celebrity at quite a young age in yoga because of kind of body stuff, I think, or you've come from a dance background, you're flexible. And that's not necessarily the case in other arts, which are just a very slow progression towards seniority.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then it brings up the point too that just because you are, quote, good at yoga, meaning you have a practice that looks, fairly impressive or Instagrammable, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a great yoga teacher. I feel like that's something that takes a lot more time and experience to develop. But when you are thrust into that role of the teacher so quickly, that can certainly have its own challenges.
Yeah.
And that's something that we try to take into, Go ahead.
No, after you.
I was just going to say that's something that we try to really take into consideration when deciding, who would be a good fit to work with, as well as we want to make sure that first and foremost, the yoga teachers that we're featuring are good teachers and that they could teach yoga. I'm less concerned that somebody has a cool looking handstand or can do something that's super impressive than I am that someone can connect with their audience and has intelligent and interesting and most of all helpful things to share.
Yeah, and it's it's true in other arts too. You can be a badass martial artist and not know how to teach, and certainly a great dancer and not know how to teach. And I think in yoga, there's this kind of weird correlation. And people, if you say good at yoga, what does that mean? Well, you can't judge someone's internal state of union with the divine. So the only thing we're left to judge
Exactly.
is like, whether they can get their foot behind their head, right? So there's this weird external measure which doesn't really line up to the heart of the art. It's a very peripheral, but it's the common sense understanding of. Someone said to me, "Oh, you've done 20 years yoga. You must be really good at yoga right now." And what they meant was that I was flexible. And I was in a class, and my wife would come along just for a kind of date. She'd come along to a yoga class, which she rarely does. And my wife was way more flexible than me in most postures because she's 28 and skinny. Like that's just how she's built. Her mum is the same. She's a slim person who naturally has very open joints, and I'm not. I'm 38 and tubby. It's like she's and you look at her and go, okay, Daria is better than Mark at yoga. Well, not really. She's never really done it. She's only been to 10 classes in her life. She's just naturally flexible. So you'd totally get the wrong idea as to who had the experience that you could benefit from if you met the two of us in a yoga class.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, this has really led to, it must be tempting for any publication to like get on the kind of, body beautiful type people. I know, let's talk a little bit about this. Like if I Google yoga journal, which I imagine is one of your competitors, and then I'm literally doing this now. I go to image search. And if I Google yoga journal, go to image search, then the top, so I'm looking at a picture now, and there's 50 people doing yoga in front of me. So there are 50 episodes of this magazine. And there's one woman of color. I'm literally looking at the screen now. There are no men. And pretty much every woman I'm looking at is slim. There's one pregnant woman. I'm literally looking at now. There's one Asian woman. There's Sean Korn. Hello, Sean. There's a couple of teachers I recognize. But pretty much everyone on there is a skinny white woman who's in her mid-30s. So we could look at like age. We could look at ethnicity. And then when I go to your website, the first thing I see, and this hasn't been set up, is a black woman of relatively large size, we might say, and then someone else of relatively large size. And it's a little bit more body diverse I'm seeing on your website. Is that something deliberate, or is that I just happened to hit you on a good day?
Well, we definitely have inclusivity and diversity as two of our core values that we always have at the forefront of everything. We want to make sure that we're not just featuring and highlighting one type of teacher, one type of person that gets highlighted in the media all the time. And I think a lot of it comes down to looking a little bit below the surface. And again, looking at who is a really good teacher, who has a lot to offer, and who's going to best, again, not to sound like a broken record, but who's going to best serve our readers, who's going to best serve our students. And it certainly doesn't mean that because someone is a young, skinny, tall, conventionally attractive white person that they can't do that, but it just means that that's not the only type of body, or that's not the only type of person who is practicing yoga or who is teaching yoga. So it's really important to us to represent what our members and what our readers actually look like, because when you see yourself represented, then there's that, oh, I can do this. This is for me. But when you're only seeing one type of person who's very different than what you might be, then it gives the message, well, this isn't for me because that's not me.
So like as a guy, for example, I was in a yoga studio and they said, hey, why don't many men come? And I got their posters out on the wall and I said, look, there are no men in these pictures. As a man, I come here, I don't feel like this is a place for me. I don't see myself here. I see women. That's just one example.
Yeah.
From sort of discrimination in the rest of society, maybe. And then it's like, on the other hand, I don't want to positively discriminate. Like I despise discrimination of all kinds. And like when I first started this podcast, there was a complaint that something like 4 out of my first 5 episodes were men. And it was a complete coincidence. I just noticed last night that 9 out of the last 10 people I interviewed were women. And that wasn't because I was positively discriminating against women. I said, you know what, I'm going to get the best people on. And I think some of the guys were a bit quicker to jump in, but certainly over the course of, 70 episodes, it started to even out. And like, I don't want to positively discriminate. Like, do you positively discriminate? Do you have teachers on who are less good simply because of the color of their skin? Because it seems like there's another trend in yoga, which I see now, which is like, okay, well, this person's larger or blacker, so let's give them a stage when they might not actually be any good.
No, that's something it's really important to me and to all of us, I think, to not tokenize people, to not try to elevate ourselves by putting someone out there and saying, hey, look, we have a teacher who's in a larger body. Please give us praise. We don't want to have anyone who we genuinely don't think is a wonderful teacher. And we don't want to do anything that could be tokenizing in that way. Basically, it's important to us to have representation, but that happens by looking at who's being ignored, not by trying to pick out like, hey, you on the street, you look different than the typical yoga person. Come in here and do a photo shoot, or come in here and write an article. Because that's not good either. That's super crappy too.
Well, I've got a book. I'll let you complete. After you.
I'm sorry. I think I missed that last thing.
I was just saying that I'm currently planning the photographs in my Embodied Yoga Principles book. And I'm like, okay, so I've got 2 people for pictures plus me. Oh, they're all white. Does this mean I have to like text my friend Mayan and say, hey, Mayan, I need a brown person. Can you come and be in my book? Like, that feels ridiculous. Like, that feels insulting to him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure I want to. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't think yet. You don't want to ask someone to do something because you want them to be your token. At least I hope you wouldn't. I hope that no one would, although I wouldn't do that all the time. I know
I'm going to get complaints if I don't. So I'm torn. Like, literally, I'm trying to decide this today. Like, I'm going to get complaints if it's just me and Jamie and Vidyadasa because we're all white people. And someone's going to look at that book and say, why are there no people of color in there? And I'm going to say, well, Mayim wasn't free that day. And he's one of our teachers. And there's another teacher who's black, but she was in another city that day. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like I've discriminated, marginalized them. They just weren't free that day when we did the photo shoot.
The question that always comes up for me too is, for example, I did a photo shoot recently with 2 friends, and we realized, after the shoot, the 3 of us were all youngish, white, finished people. And the question that came up for me from that was, well, why was it automatically just us? Clearly we know other teachers. Clearly we know other people. Who are we overlooking? Were we overlooking someone? In that case, was it because of convenience? Was it because these were the people who could demonstrate the poses best? So I feel like the good question to ask is to come back to that question: who am I overlooking? Where did I have any bias that I didn't realize as far as this goes? Or is there anything that's being ignored? Is there anybody who has a lot to share that maybe isn't being elevated or given the platform that they should? So I feel like instead of trying to fill a quota, it's more about trying to ask the question, who is not being given a seat at the table that would have a lot of offer, and how can we give them that seat at the table?
Great. I can get behind that. And, I like what you're doing. And, anyone out there that thinks this isn't an issue in yoga, do the Google search I just did. Just go to Google image search and put in yoga magazine. Let's make it neutral and see what comes up. And I think you'll be pretty surprised. I mean, the gender balance is outrageous. I think I had to track down to pick 200 before I found a man. And there certainly ain't 199 women for every man in yoga. I mean, there's less men, but there ain't 199 to 1.
Yeah, my boyfriend and I went to a bar class recently in New York City for Christmas. We spent Christmas in the city, and I had been really wanting to take this class because I love doing bar workouts at home, and there's not a studio in the little middle of nowhere town where we live. So we found the studio, and he went with me because he's always like up for trying anything. And when we got there, he was the only guy in the class, and I wouldn't have noticed that because the class was filled with women who pretty much like looked and seemed like me. And I thought, okay, this is really fun. But one of the things that we needed to buy for the class was these little socks with grippies on the bottom, because I guess so you don't slip around when you're doing the bar work.
So
and
bar is
we
like
didn't have grippy socks with us.
Just for us. It's
like kind of ballet inspired fitnessy stuff where you use a ballet bar. and we had to have these little socks. And so they sold the socks at the studio, and I purchased a pair of, women's socks. And my boyfriend looked around and said, "Are there any men's socks here?" And they said, "Well, no, but these women's mediums might fit you. That's the largest size that we have." And he mentioned that it was a really fun class. He really enjoyed it, but just that message that they didn't even have men's socks, really spoke to the lack of men in that particular discipline as well. And the fact that a man could come in and feel like, "Oh, this isn't for me," because not only am I not represented at all, they don't even have socks for me. I think that's something for teachers, everyone to consider.
I've been in major yoga studios in London that didn't have a men's changing room. They just had a women's one, and I was told to change in the toilet. And here's another example. I was in a yoga class with 8 women in a major London yoga studio, one of the biggest. And the woman said, "Okay, so run your hand, the hand position is kind of along the same as your bra strap line or your breast line." I think she said bra strap line, maybe it was. And another one was like, "Okay, run your hands here past your breasts, and it's where your womb is when you touch here." And throughout the whole time, she used anatomical references. And I'm like, look, I know where a bra would go. I did wear one once at a party, but I feel alienated just because you keep making these references. So anatomy and clothing. And I was just like, I don't really know what you mean. I get it, but I feel other because I can't relate to that. Okay. So one for the...
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to get too much on the it's hard to be a man front, because it's also, I feel like women have discrimination in way more worse areas than we do in yoga. So, it's weird when it's reversed, because I feel like if it's people are used to the discrimination being the other way, and, rightly so, that becomes the lens. And then when it's flipped, it becomes kind of hard to see maybe. So I also don't want to kind of whinge too much about it. Okay, so the body image stuff, it seems like the yoga world's waking up to a little bit. That's getting more, you are seeing sort of different body sizes and different body shapes in yoga more and more. I guess that's something you've seen in your career happen, right? Because it's really only been the last 5 years or so that I've seen that.
I feel like there's still, in some ways, so much that we could do better. But along the same lines, it's also really important to see, I think, and acknowledge the work that we have done in the yoga world, or what has changed for the better. And it's been really great. I know when I first started working, I started working in yoga publications and that aspect of the yoga world in 2009. And it wasn't really anything that anyone even talked about at all. It never came up in conversation. And then slowly between then and now, there's been so much conversation about it. And there's been some really positive changes that have happened because of those conversations. We recently did a podcast with Melanie Klein, who edited Yoga and Body Image and Yoga Rising, and she's the co-founder of the Yoga and Body Image Coalition, and she brought up a lot of really good points about that too. She's certainly been more involved in the conversations than I am, and just the fact that we weren't having these 10 years ago, and now we are, and that's super, super good.
I guess there's also this question of how responsible are publications. I remember one time I was speaking to the editor at a yoga show of one of the big British ones, and his teenage daughter was leafing through the magazine that he published. He was the chief editor, and she was kind of 13 and basically frumpy, kind of, not a slim girl. And I said, does this represent her? Do you think this has a positive impact on her to be looking through your magazine? And she was literally standing next to us while having this conversation. And he just said, "You know what? I just here to sell magazines. Skinny women sell magazines. That's my only responsibility it's not any sort of social responsibility. It's just to sell magazines. And that's what sells. So bad luck, And I was just kind of horrified. I was like, your teenage daughter's right next to us. Really? This is what you want her to see? And even with that daughter there, he really couldn't make the connection. He just said, it's like the arms dealer saying, well, someone's going to sell the weapons,
One thing that we would hear a lot back in the early days, by early days, I mean 2009, my early days, certainly there were yoga magazines have been published long before that, is I remember when Yoga International was a print magazine, we published an issue where we put a man on the cover. And that was considered to be a really big deal because everyone said, oh, well, men on the cover, no one's going to buy a yoga magazine if there's a man on the cover. Like, that's not going to sell. And it was always interesting to hear that kind of outside perspective that, like, for us, we were just thinking this is a really wonderful teacher. We want to put him on the cover and feature him because he has a lot to offer and he's in the magazine. But to hear kind of that, and I was always curious where that came from, because there didn't even seem to be any data backing that up. I'm sure there's maybe some data somewhere, but it was always just this urban myth that you can't sell a magazine if there's a man on the cover. And I don't know, I feel like that's so boring when all the covers always look the same. I don't really buy yoga magazines anymore, largely because I'm a millennial and I do everything online, but also just because even when I'm in the airport, what is that? When I'm in the airport and looking around, they look boring. Everything just looks like it's full of ads and there's the same model on every cover. And it's not intellectually stimulating. And I think that's really more important to me. And maybe that's why I'm not in sales and magazine marketing and things like that, why I'm in a more editorial online yoga place. But I'm really interested in what's interesting, who's interesting, not so much in, what's going to make somebody buy something because of what's on the cover.
No, I'm with you. I actually, my phone was broken the other day and I read a newspaper for 5 minutes. It was the weirdest experience just to sit there with a thing in front of me. It was so different from the kind of, all the choices we used to make. Listen, let's talk about online a bit more because, I've started moving into embodied work, doing embodiment courses online a little bit the last couple of years. And I always used to say, hey, you can't teach embodiment online. It's impossible. And we found that wasn't the case. And I know that Yoga International has sort of, I'm literally just in front of me now, like looking at your classes. You've got restorative, gentle stuff, yoga therapy, yin, like a huge range. By the way, listeners, I'm not being paid to say this. This is not an advert for these guys. There's other services out there as well.
No, that's true.
And it looks like a really cool range of stuff, and your classes are on there. So what do you find as some of the pros and cons of teaching online? Because obviously it's pretty different than a class, right?
Yeah, I try to look at it from the teacher's perspective and the student's perspective. Someone who teaches a lot of online yoga and is someone who takes a lot of online yoga. Because, as I said, I kind of live in the middle of nowhere. And there's one yoga studio where I live, and it's the yoga studio where I teach, our local studio. So a lot of the classes that I take and that I do are online. And when I moved here from Portland, Oregon, which was a pretty large city, I was really nervous that my yoga practice was going to suffer, that it wasn't going to advance, that I wasn't going to learn more, that I was going to get lazy about it, or it's going to fall by the wayside. And I really saw the opposite happen, that my practice grew and expanded and changed, and I learned more things and built more confidence and became a better teacher. And a lot of that had to do with just the quality that's online right now, the quality of content that's online right now, but also the fact that I could study at my own pace, that what I was studying was what I was interested in, that it wasn't just what the teacher happened to be teaching in the studio that day, which might have been too hard or too easy, or the same thing that I did in the other studio yesterday. And certainly there's a lot of value to in-person learning and taking classes in studios, and I still love to do that when I can. But just the focus and the studentship that developed from having my practice be primarily online and at home was really amazing. And then that really encouraged me as a teacher to create the type of content that I enjoyed taking, and also the type of content that I wished I could take. Like, for instance, I used to really be frustrated that the kind of practices that I wanted to take were often really long, because I didn't always have a full 90 minutes to spend in the morning doing yoga before I would go to work, and if I would go on my run, do all these other things. But I still wanted to do a practice that had the kind of poses that I like to do. Like, I really like to do handstands. I really like to do kind of more strength-focused things. And I also really like to do a little bit of breath work and meditation with that too. Of course, that's really important. That's part of what makes it different from other forms of movement and things that I do. And when I wasn't finding classes like that, I thought, well, maybe I can just make a class like that. And maybe people that I work with can make a class like that. And so that really informs the type of things that I do and that I'm interested in because I do so much of it myself. But as far as being a teacher, I would say that some of the main pros of teaching online for me are that I'm definitely an introvert and I get nervous in classrooms and nervous around people. And that's always been the most stressful part of teaching yoga to me. It takes a little while for me to warm up, for me to, interact with people. But when I'm teaching online, I feel like I can take my time a little bit more. I can take the feedback that I've gotten from students and from people who've taken my classes, and I can really say, okay, what are these people wanting? What's going to be helpful? What can I offer? And it ends up being, I think, a better product because I've had a little bit more time to sit with it and more time to work with it. The cons, of course, are, I can't see the people that I'm teaching right away. So I have to kind of guess what's the alignment cue that's going to be the most helpful to the most people here. I know that this thing has some inherent risks that we're doing maybe. How can I address those and make sure that people stay safe? And I try to just go back to thinking, what if I were the student, as the student, what would I want? What's the most important to me? Is the most important thing to me that my teacher is going to stand there and talk about the SOAS for 20 minutes? Probably not. So I don't need to do that just to prove how smart I am. And I'm not saying that people don't necessarily want to learn about the SOAS for 20 minutes. There are certainly those who do, and I've enjoyed that type of class as well. But in general, if I go to a yoga class, I want to move, I want to breathe, I want to do some yoga. And so why not teach the class that I want to take? And if people don't want to take the class that I like to teach and like to take, then there's so many other teachers who have different perspectives. Yeah. And that's also the value of teaching and taking class online, is you can really pick and choose in that way and find what's right for you. You wouldn't necessarily go to a yoga class and pay your $30 drop-in fee and come into class and think, oh my gosh, I'm so uncomfortable. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I was hoping for.
Can I jump in?
And then get up and leave. Oh yeah, of course.
Is there a risk in that? Because I'm with you. I travel a lot and I like doing online classes because I can't always get to a class. And also I'm with you. I totally get it's really nice to go, you know what, I want a yin class right now. And there may be only 2 yin classes in my town. It's not the right night of the week. So that's, helpful that I can pick something really key. But I wonder if there's not a little bit of a consumer ethos and a lack of commitment in that I can just press stop on the button. And I'm going to a class now and I'm in there for an hour and a quarter. And unless the teacher does something really awful, I'm not going to walk out, right? There's a certain commitment that hey, I walked out, I paid the money. It's going to be weird if I just walk out. I have walked out of classes, but it has to be pretty hardcore. And there's something about commitment. It could be almost like a little consumerist, pick and mix, we're doing all these online classes. And that's my worry, along with the fact that as a teacher, I just can't see if students are doing something just dangerous. Do you know what I mean? I can't actually say, hey, hang on, you might not want to put your knee that way,
Yeah. I can see kind of both sides of the coin there, because on the one hand, I know with my practice, having it be primarily online and at home has increased my commitment, just because I do it every day. And I also, and maybe this is just my personality, but if I start a class, it does have to be pretty bad for me to turn it off and not finish it. And by pretty bad, I just mean just totally not what I was looking for. But I know I can definitely see how there is that maybe oh, well, I'm just going to pick and choose a little bit. And actually, I'm not going to do yoga at all. I'm going to watch Netflix instead, now that I think of it.
Or I'm going to pick a different teacher every day, right? That kind of it's like the teacher I'm going to go see tonight, I've been working with for 10 years, more on and off, but 10 years.
Yeah.
It's difficult to have that kind of depth of relationship with a teacher. I guess the other thing that will be missing for me is state transmission. If I think of Jim, he's my teacher, one of the teachers I'm going to tonight, he has a sort of radiant, caring awareness, which I love being around. And that's difficult. I mean, you get a bit of that online, but it's difficult to that sort of state transmission is a lot less efficient online compared to when you're in a room with someone. But I don't know, I don't want to be too hard on it, because I also love the access. I can't get to a class with Stryker. It'll be super expensive for me to fly out to Colorado or where the hell he lives. But it's I can go online and I can do a class for $2 or free even sometimes. And that's so he's reaching thousands of people, which is fantastic if you've got real talent. But also I have access in a way that I just couldn't afford otherwise, right? So there is this access advantage as well.
Oh, exactly. Especially if you're in a small town and not in a big city. that just being able to take even the type of yoga class that you want to take, because if you're in a small town, you might be able to take a vinyasa class, but let's say you want to take that yin class, well, you maybe have to drive an hour or more, and you might not, that might not be realistic for you. I've also noticed that people tend to really find teachers that they like online and stick with those teachers. But just like in, the real world, it takes a little bit of trial and error sometimes, but you find someone that you connect with, and it's not the same as being with someone in person. I think that that's a really important thing too, and not to discount that at all, but you tend to find someone whose classes you really like, and then you can grow with this teacher. You can practice this teacher with this teacher on a daily basis, whereas, otherwise you might see your yoga teacher once a week, twice a week, once a year if your teacher is, someone more who tends to travel more. But yeah, people we found really find people that they connect with, and they stick with those people. And so that's why we try to have a lot of classes from a core group of really good. I think we have 16 featured teachers now on Yoga International.
Really
teachers who have,
I don't want to just big you guys up, because people will think I'm kind of, we're taking the dog. So, I mean, definitely I would recommend, from what I've seen, the teachers you have on there, some really good people and really a broad pro. And there's other ones online, isn't there? So let's mention some of the other ones so people can kind of decide for themselves where to go and maybe pick Gaia. Who else is there?
Oh, yeah.
There's two.
There's Yoga Glow and
Yoga Glow, Gaia, and you guys. That gives people 3 to look at, so they don't think I'm taking the bucks from you or something. It's really important.
And there are great teachers on all of those platforms, for sure.
Yeah, there's no embodied yoga principles yet. Those will have to sort that out. Though you have, you have inspired me to look at some of these, and I can see that's going to be. I'm just about to take a trip around Ukraine and Russia for a few weeks, and I don't always trust I'm going to be with a good, gentle teacher who's going to be considerate when I'm in those countries. So I may well tune in and take my iPad with me. So thanks for the reminder that's an option. I'm sport when I'm in Brighton, but when I'm traveling, it's super helpful, because I've just walked into too many bad yoga classes where I've essentially been abused by old school Iyengar teachers and the like. And it's just not worth the risk anymore. I've decided, as a professional who works my body. So it's nice. Some of these, this is a good reminder for me. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Let's talk about fun. So like you just remembered some of the bad experiences I've had with like yoga purists. I think you called them on an email you sent me, and people were like, there is one way to do the yoga, and but there's a new movement in yoga which is like making yoga fun and integrating like other stuff. There's a way in which people can say I am a yogi and start identifying with that, and kind of weird stuff that can happen. Like, talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear you talk about that before we wrap up.
Sure. So I think that this experience is pretty common, at least based upon some conversations that I've had. When I first started practicing yoga, I was all in. I wanted to be a yogi. Like, I started to wrap my whole identity up around that. Like, I changed the way I dressed. I changed the foods that I ate, just everything. I thought about, well, maybe I wish that I had a Sanskrit name that I could use so everyone knew I was a yogi. And that phase lasted maybe like 3-4 years. And then gradually I started to get a little bit frustrated with myself. And I kind of stopped self-identifying. I don't know that anyone else would have made this identification, but stopped identifying as the yoga person, and then started identifying more as myself again. And it was great to feel more like myself. And I don't know when this shift happened. Maybe it's just I can't adopt a persona for so long, I guess. But this shift that yoga doesn't have to be something that I identify myself as or with, but really it's a tool that can make my life as me, the person that I actually am, better and more fun even, and more effective and more interesting. And a lot of that came back to just like not taking myself so seriously, and looking at the ways that practice really can be fun. One of the words that I hear in yoga circles all the time is playful. And it's a word that I used to use a lot. And now it's one of those words where I feel like when because my job involves yoga and words, there are some words that I hear so many times. I'm like, I never want to hear that word again. And playful is like one of those words. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's playful.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And I was really thinking about that the other, like, what is a playful yoga practice?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just because you did like a couple hops or jumps? Is it because you didn't have another adjective you could use to describe it? Like what? But making yoga fun in ways that maybe might seem less yogic on the surface is something that I feel really passionately about. Someone that's a big inspiration to me is my friend Justine at Yoga Quest. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization at all.
What's Yoga
Quest? They're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, here in the U.S., and they combine fandoms with yoga, and they tell these stories. You go on these yoga adventures, like you might have like a Star Wars inspired yoga quest, or a Star Trek inspired yoga quest, or you could have anything, like a favorite television show, a favorite book, something, and you tell this story, and you link words and phrases to yoga practices and yoga poses, and it's super accessible. It's super fun. It's just one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've ever had taking these classes. And on the surface, it might, not look like yoga.
Let's get her on the show. Email introduce me. We'll get her on the show. That sounds good. So email introduce me. Like, I've often thought that real creativity was one of the main things missing from most yoga. Like we do a 4 elements model, and we say, look, there's the water of yin and the earth of Iyengar and the fire of hot. And where's the air? Maybe a little bit in aerial yoga, but like, where's the play? Where's the fun? Where's the silliness? And I feel like that is something that's often a bit missing. So it's nice to take that in. And, in terms of what you said about identity, like that happens in other arts too, that I've definitely seen people say, I am an Aikidoka, I identify as that. And I actually think it keeps them away from the practice. It keeps them away from engaging with it on a funny level, and leads to all sorts of weird inauthenticity. So, I think that one is not just the yogis who do that one. I think maybe it's a stage people have to kind of pass through. They have to kind of wrap themselves in the outward appearances of an art before they can really get a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, I think so too. And when I think back to like my past desire to so identify as a yoga person, I often wonder how much of that had to do with actually the fact that I was doing yoga, and how much of it had to do with the fact that when I really got involved with yoga, I was in my late teens and early 20s. And that's just something that so many of us go through during that time period.
Yep. Yeah. 18 years old. I think I liked the idea of Aikido better than actually Aikido, and it was like, people sometimes go through funny stages with these things, but I trust that the intention, people are gradually getting towards something that might be deeper and more helpful. So as long as we hold these things loosely, huh? Okay. So we did moving towards wrap up. So this has been fun, and it's important to hear from a publisher. So I feel like often, like magazines and websites and people, it's easy to kind of be critical and say, it's like people say, oh, those bloody rich people, or oh, those people who run the magazines or whatever. And it's like actually nice to humanize that and hear from someone on the other side of that. So I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.
And a couple of things to finish. So yogainternational.com is the website that we've been talking about, and I've literally been had in front of me while we've been talking. Is there any other websites or connected with you that people might want to have a look at?
The podcast that we have in Yoga International is Yoga Talk, and that's available on iTunes if anyone is interested in taking a listen to that. And my website is catdoeshandstands.com, and it's pretty abysmal at this point. It's not associated with Yoga International at all, but you can go there and it'll take you directly to my online classes and my articles.
Sorry, can I say that again? Because I want to link it on their sites. Cat Does Handstands, was it?
Catdoeshandstands.com.
Cat Does.
But there's
handstands.com. Got it.
My contact info, if you're looking for an editor for freelance projects, things like that, I'm sometimes available for stuff like that. So that's all there.
There you are, doing a handstand. Awesome. I often make fun of yoga handstands. I love a good handstand too. Alrighty, so good to talk to you today, Kat. Any final closing message to all our listeners about the body before we wrap up?
No, just keep exploring, keep having fun. Don't forget about the fun. It really is an important part of movements of all kinds.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.